Hey, David here. So today I want to do a video on simple exposure. This morning I did a video, a bit of a rant that I called Exposure for Idiots, and I pulled that down because I don't think it was productive, but what I hope to accomplish with this video is what I wanted to accomplish with that one and give a little more insight as to my thought process. But I'm going to cut to the chase quickly, and I'll get to the other stuff like more of the pro things later on in this video. But let's just cut to the chase for simple exposure. First thing that you have to remember, this is critical. For red raw, everything we're talking about today in this video is about red raw, shooting red raw on the Nikon ZR Z-Red. I'm shooting on it right now. And the exposure settings for, or the zebra settings for getting proper exposure, okay? If you're shooting in red raw and you have the video assist off, okay, the video assist off, or LUTs, whatever you want to call it, you want that off, okay? The numbers I'm giving you right now, they need to be off. For middle gray, this is what middle gray is. If you don't know what that is, I'll talk a little bit about it later. For middle gray, you want to have it at 85. For skin tones, which is like my skin tones, you want to have that at 115. Now, I'm going to mention that for darker skin tones, you might want to bring it down to 110-ish, maybe 1.5, depending on how dark the skins are. But for the most part, Caucasian, typically it's in the 115 to 120 range. So if you leave it at 115 and when you set it in the Z-Red, it gives a spread of, I think it's 10. So just set it at 115. And for highlights, set it at 180. Now that is not the clip setting, but 180 gives you a little bit of leeway. I would say it's in the 10% range. It gives you a little leeway that if you're getting into that, you are going to be clipping. So those are the three numbers: 85, 115, and 180. Get out and shoot with your Z-Red, but remember, you need to not have the video assist on. One other quick thing that's important, and that is, and I've said this before, shoot 800 ISO or 6400 ISO in red raw. It is my opinion you don't want to shoot anything else because it also affects these numbers I gave you. And I'm not going to get into too much detail of it, but shoot 800 ISO or shoot 6400 ISO and use these numbers I told you, and you'll be good to go. It's still the same. It's 85, 115, 180, but don't be moving around. Don't be using ISO for exposure. Use your f-stops. As you know, use your shutter angle if you have to. Use NDs if you have to. Okay, we'll talk more about this in the Exposure Pro, but 800 and 6400 ISO only. So if you want to leave now, I understand, but now I'm going to get into why you don't want to use LUTs for exposure, because LUTs are lookup tables, and it's my opinion that you really don't want to be using LUTs for exposure. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about my rant this morning, where I get frustrated when I see on YouTube people talking about using LUTs for exposure, especially with the Z-Red here. You know, they're saying that this camera's got quirks and there's something wrong with the waveform and things like that. And I'm not going to get into details about, how do I say this, how they're wrong. Do I want to say it that way? I don't think they understand what's happening. And I'm going to get a little bit into, I want to do a video later that I call the Exposure Pro version, and I'm not going to dive into it here, but just in a nutshell, based on my experience, my history, if you will, I've never been comfortable exposing things based on using a LUT. Does it mean you can't? Well, no, because if you've got that picture right in front of you, yeah, you can make sure that it looks right. You know, I get it, right? But it's not an exposure tool. And here's why it's a problem. If you're exposing based on a LUT, you better know that LUT, and you better know where the exposure lands, if you will. So for example, on the Z-Red, the LUT that came with the camera, it's way off. So if you use the numbers that I just gave you, it's not going to work. And depending on the LUT, those numbers might be different things. So some people are saying, oh yeah, we'll set the clip at 245 or this, that, or whatever. You know, they're kind of guessing, seeing what works and whatnot. And I get that. And then you've got these guys that are saying, well, use this false color LUT. But the thing you have to understand is that when you stick a LUT up, you have to know the environment or the choices that the person created that LUT with made, if you will. You know what I'm saying? And I don't want to get into too much detail of it here, but when you use the numbers that I just gave you and you get rid of the LUT, it's going to be nailed. It is going to be nailed exposure. So let me tell you when and why you might use a LUT. So for example, I've got a LUT on right here, right now. For what reason? The only reason I would have that is to kind of get an idea of the shadows on my face and things like that. There's not a whole lot here with what I'm doing. There's a place for that, but I would not do it for exposure. And then here's something else too. If you've got clients or something like that, here's a neat thing about getting the right exposure. If you get the right exposure using red raw, using the numbers I gave you, LUTs, video assist off, when you play it back, I want you to notice something. When you go to play it, when it first pops up, it's red raw. And then when you hit play, that LUT kicks in, or whatever, you know, the video assist, if you will. And so the advantages of that is that if you get proper exposure, you can have multiple LUTs if you want. You could have multiple LUTs in this camera, and you can go and switch the LUTs, and as you play it back, you can see that footage with the different LUT. Does that make sense what I'm saying? And I would much prefer to do that. Why? I don't know. If I'm showing it to a client, maybe I shoot footage and I say, hey, which look do you like, right? And I show them 3, 4, 5, 10 of them that I have in my camera, and they say, oh, well, I like that. I like more of a corporate look, or do you want more of the cinematic look? You understand what I'm saying? But if you're doing your exposure based on the LUT, then those other LUTs ain't gonna look right because the red raw is still recorded based on the exposure. Does that make sense? One other thing that's worth pointing out is that based on my understanding, and I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, is that the zebras will change with the LUT, right? But the waveform does not. If you're looking at the waveform and you're shooting something, I don't care what LUT you have on there, that waveform isn't changing in red raw. It hits that ceiling. Remember that ceiling I said is 180, let's just say it's 195, maybe a little under 200. It hits that ceiling and it's done, that's clipped. So you need to keep it under that, which is why that number needs to be at 180. If you put a LUT on there, it changes, okay? And the zebras change. Okay, I'm not going to get into too much into it here, but the waveform doesn't change. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this real quick to kind of give you a little bit of idea of what I'm talking about. Middle gray is, they call it 18% gray. This is how you used to expose when you didn't have all of these tools. Now, you can still use it now because middle gray, when you expose for middle gray, it's, how do I say it? It's the middle of an average scene. Does that make sense what I'm saying? So this is the average of a scene. And so if you expose for this, you have the best chance of getting everything or most of it exposed. So that's what middle gray is. Skin tones, Caucasian skin tones, are about a stop above middle gray. Okay, so if the skin tones are what's critical for you, and which is for me, you know, in making movies and stuff like that, skin is arguably the most important part. And I don't want to get off on too big of a tangent here, but if I have my highlights protected, but the skin looks bad, that's not going to be good. I'd rather have the skin look good and have those highlights be blown just a little bit because that's going to be less distracting, right? Here I have a color chart, and this top one is the clipping, right? This is the white, this is the middle gray, this is black. And then you have all these skin tones here, and this can help you too. But run and gun, I'll talk about this more in the pro one. But with run and gun, you're not really in a place where you're gonna be pulling these things out. You kind of need to flip to a zebra, if you will, or look at that waveform and get what you want. And so here's the downside of a waveform versus the middle gray is you might not be able to really assess, how do I say this, the proper exposure for the whole scene. Does that make sense? And you certainly don't want to be relying on the camera for auto exposure. And in red raw on the Z-Red, you don't have that option. Okay, it's all manual. And so middle gray is the safe zone, right? So if you have the zebra set at middle gray and you are out and about in the city or wherever you're at, you can get that exposure where most of it looks red, right? It looks good. Most of it looks, I say red. I've got my zebras set to red. You may not want your zebras at red. You may want them at white or yellow or whatever. So I'm saying red. You get as much of it as you can. And in the pro version, Exposure Pro, I'll start getting more into buttons and stuff like that. But right now, it's literally just 2 buttons away. You hit a button on the screen and you can change, you can either turn the Zebra's on or off. You can, right next to it is the assist. So you could get the exposure kind of the way you want it, and then you could boom, boom, and hit that video LUT or whatever. Now you're looking at the LUT. But once again, I'm the type of guy that I would rather have the exposure right, okay? If the Zebra's not getting in the way of me being able to frame what I'm looking at, I'd rather make sure I'm getting right exposure, because if the exposure is right, when I get into post, I have all the options. If I'm basing my exposure on a LUT, I better like that LUT, and I better like that look, because that's what a LUT is. It's a look-up table. I better like it, because if I want to do something else, I may not have exposed it properly. Okay, so back to real quick about these guys. You know, I don't want to beat these guys up. There's guys out there that have their, you know, false color LUT, and there's one guy that said, you know, I've got this LUT that's very, you know, basic, pastel, whatever word he used, you know, and you can use that. And I get it. Some of you guys may want to do that. And if you're from a background of used to looking at a screen and exposing from a screen, I get it. That may be what you're comfortable with, what you want to do. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I'm just telling you, I won't do that, because I want to have proper exposure so that when I get to post, like I've already said, I've got all the options. So be sure and subscribe if you want to see more. I'm going to throw in a plug for my the Film Look series that I did. And that series is important. The reason it's important is I know there's no B-roll, it's just me talking, and that's intentional. But it's important to know where we've come from, if you will, and to where we're at. I get into, you know, film. You know, the original sensor was film, and then there was a period of time that people were trying to replicate film, and now we're to a part now, and I don't want to give too much of the series, I don't want to give it away, but people don't know what Film Look is, because it's been, how do I say this? It's becoming so personal. And that's why you've got all these Film Look LUTs and stuff like that. And guess what? A lot of them don't look anything like film, okay? So if you get a chance, I know I'm doing a plug for this, watch that. It's kind of long, but when you get through it, I think that you'll have an understanding of some things that maybe you didn't have before. And then in the near future, I'm going to put together this Exposure Pro series, or version, if you will, where I get a little deeper. And I can't think of anything else I want to say, but I just wanted to get this out there, because I know some of you guys out there. I got a comment from one guy that said, you know, can you do the Pro one? Because I'm shooting something next week. If you take these numbers that I just gave you and you expose in Red RAW, once again, it has nothing to do with the others. It has nothing to do with ProRes RAW. It has nothing to do with NRAW, okay? These numbers I gave you are for Red RAW with no LUTs, okay? All right, so that's it, and I hope you've learned something with this. Of course, leave me comments, ask me questions. If you think I'm crazy, tell me I'm crazy, and I'll see you next time, okay? Take care.